We bring our sermon series on the Sabbath to a conclusion today. Rosemary Sword and Philip Zimbardo, in their book The Time Cure, give 3 ways that you can know if you're in too much of a rush. Moving from one checkout line to another because it looks shorter or faster. Counting the cars in front of you and either getting in the lane that has the least or is going the fastest. Multitasking to the point of forgetting one of the tasks. I don't have a problem with point 1 there when I go and watch the Arsenal with my son Noah, because when we queue up to get a coffee or a fizzy drink, we stand in 2 queues, and whichever one gets there first, the other person switches over and gets in that queue with them. So we're always there on time. Last game we went to, we actually sat down in our seats as the referee blew the whistle to start, and it was like, this is a perfect father-son moment where we have worked out all of the timings brilliantly. I've just finished a book recently by John Mark Comer. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, How to Stay Emotionally Healthy and Spiritually Alive in the Chaos of the Modern World. And he gives 10 symptoms for what he calls hurry sickness. And this could be a little quiz for you. How many of these can you tick off? I'm going to read his words word for word. He says the first one is irritability. You get mad, frustrated, or just annoyed way too easily. Little normal things irk you. Hypersensitivity. All it takes is a minor comment to hurt your feelings, a grumpy email to set you off, or a little turn of events to throw you into an emotional funk and ruin your day. Restlessness. When you actually do try and slow down and rest, you can't relax. Workaholism, or just non-stop activity. You just don't know when to stop, or worse, you can't stop. Emotional numbness. You just don't have the capacity to feel another's pain, or your own pain for that matter. Empathy is a rare feeling for you. You just don't have time for it. About 4 years ago, when I was nearing burnout here at church, which I've shared before and was able to pull back from because the trustees and the elders and you as a church family wrapped me up and said, just take it a bit easier for a few months. This one really spoke to me, emotional numbness, because I sat with the elders and I said to them, look, I'm going to tell you something that you're not going to have to sack me for, but this is where I'm at. And I shared, this is where I've got to in my life. And one of those elders, Sarah Jennings, who I get on really well with, she came up to me the next day a bit annoyed and said, why didn't you tell us this was going on for the last few months? And I said, because I didn't know. I said, I just felt numb. I just felt this kind of emptiness. And it wasn't until my mentor said to me, if you don't change something, something will change, that I realised this was where I was heading. Out of order priorities. You feel disconnected from your identity and calling. You're always getting sucked into the tyranny of the urgent, not the important. Your life is reactive, not proactive. You're busier than ever before, yet still feel like you don't have time for what really matters to you. Lack of care for your body. You don't have time for the basics. 8 hours of sleep a night, daily exercise, healthy home-cooked food, minimal stimulants, margin in your life. You gain weight, get sick multiple times a year, regularly wake up tired, don't sleep well. How many people do you know who work in full-on jobs who say, oh, when we go on holiday for 2 weeks, if they do, the first 4 days I'm just ill. Blech! Oh, it's great in Malibu, isn't it? Or in Southend-on-Sea or wherever you go. Just ill. Escapist behaviours. When we're too tired to do what's actually life-giving for our souls, we each turn to our distraction of choice, overeating, over-drinking, binge-watching Netflix, browsing social media, surfing the web. Name your preferred cultural narcotic. Narcotics are good, healthy even, on occasional and in short-term basis when they shield us from unnecessary pain. But when we abuse them to escape from reality, they eat us alive. Slippage in spiritual disciplines. If you're anything like me, he says, when you get over busy, the things that are truly life-giving for your soul are the first things to go rather than the first go-to. And I'm not talking here legalistically. I'm talking about things that actually give us life and connect us to God and make us more aware of those around us. And the final indicator, he says, is isolation. You feel disconnected from God, others, and yourself. Even time on your own is unpleasant. I don't like the person I am becoming. Hurry sickness. How many of those did you tick off? Obviously, as a Baptist minister, I didn't tick any off. Or maybe I'm not telling the truth there. There was an English explorer in the 1800s, late 1800s, who went to Africa, and he wanted to make a rapid journey through the jungle. And he had some local porters who carried his supplies and food. And after an exhausting couple of days of going through the jungle at rapid pace, they just refused to move on. And he was pushing and cajoling and telling them, I'll give you more money, let's keep going. And they said, we're waiting for our souls to catch up with our bodies. We're waiting for our souls to catch up with our bodies. Anyone here ever feel like that? I hear so many people in church say, Neil, I love it when we just have a moment of quiet space. We as Baptists were useless at that 30 or 40 years ago. If in a service someone said, we're now going to quietly have a time of prayer, you could sense the deacons flinching. We're not doing something. We must have noise. Now we welcome that space to just pause, waiting for our souls to catch up with our bodies. What is Sabbath? Sabbath is simple. It's one day's rest in 7. What could be simpler? A child could work that out. And yet, if you're like me, we struggle to observe Sabbath. Sabbath in Hebrew, the Greek Hebrew word is Shabbat, means stop. And Anne Lamott says no is a complete sentence. Have you ever tried that when someone says, oh, would you like to do this? You go no, and then you have to justify it all as to why you can't do it. You don't have to. You can just say no. Or here's a good one. You can just write meetings in. If you're married or you're going to get married next Saturday, let's say, make sure that you have that time together and put it in your diary as a meeting. I learned this early on as a minister. I'd say, oh, no, I can't do that because Joe and I are going out. Joe's my wife. They'd say, oh, well, you can do that another time, can't you? Because it's just your wife. You're always around. She's probably sick and tired of you. You've been married for 6 months. Give her a break. If I say, I've got a meeting with Joe, I've got a meeting. Oh, okay. Fine. For me, every day of the week, 9 till 10 is a meeting with Jesus. And it's in my diary, where I pray, I read, I reflect, I walk. If I didn't put that meeting in, it would slip. And my PA, who's brilliant, knows, the staff team here know, 9 till 10, generally, I'm in a meeting with Jesus. Stop. Eugene Peterson said it's a stop sign on the street of days. He said, in the midst of work, we can lose the origin and the purpose of why we're actually working. Are you so busy sometimes that you think, why on God's green earth am I actually doing this? And the Sabbath is the day where we stop and think, God's in charge, and I can reflect and remember why I'm doing it. And I know as I'm saying these words, I'm really winding some of you up, because you're saying, Neil, you don't understand my life and my system of doing things, and I do shift work and all of that stuff, and I would really like to punch you now, Neil. I'd like to lay hands on you in Christian love, because you are just a minister with your head in the clouds and you don't understand the real world. I do understand the real world. I live in it like you do. I've got 4 kids and a wife and a mum who is lovely, I think. She's coming back on a plane from holiday, so she's not going to watch this. And don't any of you tell her, because I know what you're like. Sabbath means stop in Hebrew, but it also means, and I learnt this recently, delight. Did you know that? Because growing up, I'd always heard Sabbath, stop. And when you wrote in about your experiences of Sabbath a few weeks ago, all of them were pretty much negative about growing up, and you couldn't watch TV and you could only read Christian books and you had to go to church 400 times a day and all of that kind of stuff. Stop. And it is stop, but it's also delight. It's doing things that give us life. Sabbath isn't the same as a day off. It's not running errands and catching up on emails. It's doing things that we enjoy. Eugene Peterson says it's an illegitimate Sabbath if we're doing errands, but he uses a stronger word than that. Brother Lawrence was a French Christian monk. Very serious they were as a community, and he wrote a book, The Rule of Life of the Companions. And in it he said Sabbath is planned neglect. It's when we deliberately choose to not do the things that we have to do in our everyday life. If you hate gardening, you do not mow the lawn or weed the flower patches, because that's not Sabbath. If you love gardening, knock yourself out with the weeds. That could be misinterpreted, couldn't it? Go for it. It's about doing things that delight us. Again, Eugene Peterson says Sabbath is pray and play. Pray, connecting with God and others. Play, doing things that give us life. That's what Sabbath is. It's stop and delight. Why have a weekly Sabbath? Somebody did what do they call it? The things where you look at lots of people. My mind's gone blank. Pardon? Survey, that's it. Think, why did I forget that word? It's not a hard word, is it? That's a really simple word. If it had been like confabulation or something, I can understand. Survey's really basic. They did a survey of thousands of people in America who were religious, across the religions. And what they found was that Seventh-day Adventists lived on average 10 years longer than Christians in America. And if you added up that 10 years longer, it's basically one day in every 7. And what do Seventh-day Adventists do religiously? They observe Sabbath. And they got a day a week extra in their lives on average, 10 years longer in their life. Could that be linked in any way, that in stopping they got more? In the Ten Commandments it says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in the 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now, whether we think that creation story is a poem or it's literal and it's 6 days and 1 day's rest, or 6 periods of time, because the Hebrew is eon, which can mean day or it can mean a period of time. So 6 billion chunks of years and then resting. The point is, God rested on the final day period of time. God was modelling for us what we should do. The Sabbath, if you divide it into a pie chart of words of the Ten Commandments, takes up 30% of the words. God is making a point, don't we think, here? He said, do not kill. I don't need to explain that, do I? It's pretty obvious. Do not commit adultery. Again, duh, you know that one. But Sabbath, guys, you're not going to get this, are you? So I'm going to have to really go to some lengths to tell you that you need to rest. Oh, and if you've got any servants, them as well, and your animals, and the foreigners in your country, you've got to stop and delight. Sabbath's mentioned over 100 times in the Old Testament, over 40 times in the New Testament. And Sabbath is for everyone. Jesus said Sabbath is made for humans, not humans for Sabbath. I think we need to hear both halves of that sentence. Often we hear Sabbath is made for humans, obey it, and we hate it. And sometimes we hear not humans for the Sabbath. We need both parts. We need to hear, some of us, Sabbath is made for you because it's good for you. And other of us need to hear, look, you're being too legalistic about it. You're not made for the Sabbath. It's the other way around. We need no Sabbath moral police in the church judging one another. Lewis Gard is a footballer at Tonbridge Angels where I'm the chaplain. He's the one that looks like Hercule Poirot rather than Rodney Trotter. They're both injured at the moment. And Lewis Gard has come to us from Southend United. He played at a very high level, Division 1, and he just keeps getting injured. So he's dropped down a few leagues to get his fitness back up. And he is the most gifted footballer I've seen play down there. Other players say to him at the end of games, "How did you do that with the ball? I don't understand it." And he was injured in one training session, and I was sat down, and he came and sat next to me, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What's the point of life? I'm really lazy at the moment. I'm not going to the gym at all. I'm meant to go to the gym every morning before I go to work, and I just can't be bothered to do it." And I said to him, "Gardy, you need to work out what you were created for." I said, I believe that God creates all of us, whether you believe that or not, and God has created you for a purpose. What is it? He said, "I think it's to be the best footballer I can be to make a difference for others." Well then, Gardy, what are you going to do to get to that place? "Well, I don't get home from training on Tuesday and Thursday till 10:30 at night, and I've not had tea, so I just eat rubbish." "Well, you live with your mum and she cooks for you, so why don't you ask her to put something in the fridge? So when you get home, you just bung it in the microwave and eat something healthy." "And how much do you watch on the TV when you get home on those days?" "Oh, I'm on it for ages, just surfing the net." "Well, don't. Watch one relaxing programme or read." "Read?" No, I do him a disservice. He reads books. We talk about them. I said, "I'm going to text you in the mornings. How you doing? How you doing with getting to the gym? How you doing with your life choices?" Because there's a guy who's 22 thinking, "I do not want to waste my life. I don't want to get to the end and think, well, what was the point of that?" Rodney Trotter behind him hasn't got a clue. He's just bumbling through. But Lewis Gard is thinking, what am I going to do to make a difference? Paul said to the early church, be very careful then how you live. Not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Sabbath is a time to also forget the failures of work. You know, that time you brought into the boss's office and stripped down. That time you know you fumbled the ball and missed it. That time you got to work late again and could feel the pressure from the people you work with. Sabbath is a day to just say, I can forget all that. I'm not marshalled and monitored by those things, whether it's paid or volunteer employment that we have. Jesus said, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Following Jesus means, how would Jesus live if he was me? How would Jesus live if he was me? And I think for all of us, Jesus would say, I'd slow down. I'd slow down physically for some of you. I'd slow down emotionally for some of you who are het up. I'd slow down intellectually for some of you who overthink, and I get that. I'd slow down spiritually as well, trying to overachieve to gain my love, relax in my love and receive it. So when should I observe Sabbath? Make an intentional, planned decision. A decision for you and your family and your loved ones. And then trial it for at least 3 up to 6 months. I'm going to do this religiously and try and get it to be a rhythm of my life. If we do it for 2 weeks, it won't stick. But try it. And again, as I've said every week, it may be that we can't start with a full day. It might be that you think, I'm going to take a chunk of a day. I'm going to take this evening, Tuesday evening, every week, I am going to stop and delight. And I'm going to let people know from 5:30 till whenever I'm Sabbathing. And also, I found this really releasing. I read one lady who's in her 70s now who said, Sabbath is different in different phases of life. She said, and I had to learn that with my husband and my kids as we moved around the world and our lives changed and our work balance changed. So there were some times, she said, as a family, we all did Sabbath together and it was wonderful. Then when my two boys became teenagers, they didn't want to do Sabbath in the way that we did it, and so they did it in a different way. And then when my husband got a different job, when our kids had moved out, his Sabbath was on a different day to my Sabbath. But as long as we communicated those different phases, we could observe Sabbath together. And please don't compare your worst of Sabbath to somebody else's perceived best. Your worst Sabbath is reading every now and then with Jesus for 2 minutes whilst you're getting ready to go to work, and you think that Joe Bloggs down the road has a Sabbath where they just listen to the words of St. Francis of Assisi and sparrows come and rest on their shoulders. And this is in a lift in London, not in nature. Because they are so one with God and you are just a pile of dribble that can never achieve anything. We're so good on that. It's one of the reasons I've stopped going on Facebook. Nothing against Facebook, honestly. But everyone, it's, this is my best. And you look at their best all the time and compare it to your worst. It doesn't do our soul any good. And the rest of Facebook is just what people eat. That just makes me hungry. So that's self-defeating as well. Where should I observe Sabbath? Think of places you will not go to on your Sabbath. So I, on a Friday, do not come to this building. I love it. I love the people in it, but it's where I work. And so I try and avoid even picking my kids up from brigades if possible. Sometimes I will, but if I do, I sit in the car because this is my place where I do my work. Oh, Neil, we should be more open than that. But when you just open those flaps, just a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, Sabbath goes. And are there places where you really connect with God? Maybe that dog walk. You think, I love that one. When we come over that horizon and we see those people. How should I observe Sabbath? Lynn Babb says, what should I do? And she encourages us to have 3 questions. Does my Sabbath promote rest or relaxation? Does it bring delight and enjoyment? Does it give a sense of holiness? Nicholas Lee says, in Jewish tradition and practice, Sabbath is an essentially social rather than solitary space. It's somewhere where we are with others. The conclusion I came to is I will observe Sabbath with God and others in restful, delightful and holy ways which are good. That for me captures Sabbath. John Mark Comer says, what we give our attention to is the person we become. Here's some ideas for Sabbath. Eat together. Eat together with no devices. No telly on, no phones, no tablets. Eat together. If you live on your own, find people that you can eat together. Maybe your small group or a friend, and ask them intentionally. Say, can we do this together? Because it will be good for me and hopefully good for you. Have a tech fast. It might be your phone or it might be an app. You think, actually, I love Facebook. It's good for me. But on my Sabbath, I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to check work emails. Or I'm going to turn my phone off completely. Napping. This came up in all the books I read, that napping is a really good part of Sabbath observance. Sitting by the window, looking out and falling asleep. Why have we been trained that that's wrong? When every business guru says take a power nap in the afternoon to increase your productivity. I can see some of you nudging other people there that are experts at napping. My dad could do it like that. We'd have the family all around us, kids climbing over him. He'd be snoring like a gorilla, sweating, asleep. My mother-in-law, I say to her when she comes around, which 15 minutes of a film would you like to watch today? Because we know that 15 minutes in, she's like Lenin in his tomb. Napping's fine. If you need to do it, do it. Say to your spouse, if you live in a family situation, I'm just going to go upstairs and have a rest. Can you look after the kids? Read a good book. A book that takes you out of work and to-do lists, that gets you lost. It doesn't have to be Christian. So many Christian novels, in my opinion, that I've read are just rubbish. There are some that are different and brilliant, Like the one, that scarlet letter. What's it called, Joe? You don't know, do you? Anyway, it's good. But a lot of them are not good, and there's some brilliant novels out there that you can read. I read Brothers Karamazov in my sabbatical. Unbelievable. Long, won't do it again, but it took me into a whole other world that was wonderful and drenched in the grace of God. Have a film night. Joe said for us leading up to Christmas, every Saturday night we're going to have a Christmas film night. And so we all got to choose as a family which Christmas films we want to watch. I put 2 forward. Die Hard and Jaws. And my family said Jaws doesn't count, so I found one called Santa Jaws. And they've said no. But we're going to sit down on a Saturday for a couple of hours with some home-cooked food and watch a film. Thank you box. I thought, why don't we as a family have a thank you box where when somebody does something nice for you, you just write it on a note and put it in the box, and then at some point in the week on your Sabbath, you open the box up and you read out those thank yous. I realise the problem would be there'd be so many read about me in the family, that will be awkward and embarrassing, but I will humbly accept them. But isn't it good sometimes when we're always saying to people, you need to do this, you need to do that, have you done this, is this done on your to-do list, to actually sit down and say, thank you. Thank you for that went unnoticed, you thought. Thank you for that you always do and we don't really appreciate. Thank you. Nicholas Lee said, making love is one of the sacred duties of Sabbath, according to the Talmud and the rabbis. In some sects, it is traditional to make love 4 times during Sabbath. Whew. But joking aside, it takes you outside of time, intimate delight, something that God gave to those who are married one to another. I asked the staff team, any practical ideas for what we do on Sabbath? Walk, listen to worship music, attend church in person or online. No TBC work, do one thing that brings me joy, meet a friend for breakfast, walk the dog or go sailing. Family time, either just the 4 of us or with my sister's family. Gardening. I garden and find planting seeds and bulbs particularly connect me with God as I look to the future with hope of what's to come. The world will try and rob us of Sabbath. It wants us to keep going. Our family, maybe. Our friends, possibly. Our employers, likely. Want us to just keep going and steal Sabbath from us. Whatever we're going to do to observe Sabbath, please communicate it to the people around you. Say, these are the decisions that I've made on what I'm going to do so that I can rest for one period of time or one day a week. I'm going to leave the final words to Walter Brueggemann, who has stimulated this series. He says, people who keep Sabbath live all 7 days differently. People who keep Sabbath live all 7 days differently. Let's pause for a moment as we listen to some music on the screen, and I'd encourage you just please to reflect, do I need to change or add anything into my life when it comes to Sabbath? Is there something that I need to talk to my friends or family about and say, I'm now going to do this so that I can stop and delight?